Hey guys, it's Iconic, and in this one I want to do a quick build showcase for the build I have been playing on stream for what I think is the past week, which is basically Syndicate Operatives Chieftain, which is a very comfortable Spectre build that has Giga regen, has a lot of screen clear, very comfortable at mapping, and overall a great experience. Now, to be forewarned though, this great experience does come with a price tag, and as of this moment I only have the highest budget PoEs that have mage bloods. I will be working on a cheaper variant without mage blood, but even that cheaper variant is going to not be low budget. I think the price point I'm aiming for is a mid to high budget. And as for whites, on the more expensive side, it's just when it comes to Chieftain and when it comes to Syndicate Operatives specifically, Syndicate Operatives require a very substantial investment to actually make them feel very smooth and very competitive with the more meta options. So that typically involves plugging some holes using stuff like mage blood and other avenues like that, or using an adorned as an example as a way to boost your damage, which are really not budget friendly things. And without the flat damage coming from some of these sources, you just don't have too much going for Syndicate Operatives to make them competitive. That is why this is at its core a more expensive setup. It is for people who really want the clear speed at the Syndicate Operatives, because they clear, in my opinion, even better than Wretched Fathers, because they off-screen just as well as they on-screen kill enemies, and unlike the Defilers who have the Doriani AoE radius that they basically kill everything inside. That is the biggest appeal when it comes to Syndicate Operatives and why you would want to consider playing this build. That being said, at its core, this build is not an uber bosser, because with the defensive layering and how we've set up the character, and I will go into more detail later on, but it is not friendly for taking uber boss hits. And this is mostly because we do not have block on this build, because we are running something that doesn't allow us to block. And this if eventually means that we need to be able to outrightly eat uber boss hits to be able to live through their attacks, and we can eat some damage from them, but we can't eat all of it. So this is just to say it is not an uber bosser. However, it is very tanky when it comes to your regular mapping content. I've been running T17s basically all day for like a few days at this point. It feels very comfortable. It feels very nice to just turn your brain off and kill hordes of enemies without having to worry about anything, really. It's that comfortable. But anyways, let's get into the build. If you're enjoying the content and you haven't already, do consider liking and subscribing, as it helps a lot with the algorithm and with our 2025 goal of getting 2,000 subs, after which I will be doing a face reveal on stream and here on YouTube. Now, at its core, let's talk a bit about why we went Chieftain and not like Necromancer. The biggest reason we went Chieftain is because, like I said earlier, Syndicate Operatives need a lot of flat damage to succeed. And part of the ways we are providing that flat damage is through the use of Rallying Cry, which is a warcry that gives your allies, I guess, a buff that has a % of your added damage too on it. So all the damage from your weapon, a % of that is given to your nearby allies, and it's double effectiveness for your minions. And we're going to be scaling out a bunch of warcry buff effects, so they actually get even more flat damage than what our weapon has. And of course, this also means we have to worry about the power mechanic when it comes to warcries, just the way they function. So the way we are approaching that is by going Chieftain. By going Chieftain, we have access to Sion's Sun's Roar as an Ascendancy, which gives warcries infinite power, which basically means that we don't have to worry about nearby enemies, allies. We don't have to worry about any of those counts. It is just always max power warcries all day, every day, which is very nice. That is the core of why Chieftain. Aside that, we have the added advantage of being able to just scale fire res as our only resistance, and that covers cold and lightning res. And because this build goes CI, you don't even have to worry about chaos res because you're immune to it, and you can easily get 90% max res because, again, Chieftain is just that good. But anyways, that is why we're going Chieftain. And then we also picked our bloodline Ascendancy as Katarina. And the reason we went for Katarina is because we are using Spectres as our main DPS. We can get up to 10 max Spectres, which is going to be a 100% increase. Defense is coming from the Umbra Army Ascendancy. This paired with, I think, about 40% increased defense is coming from Bone Meld, means it becomes very efficient to scale any sort of defense. And as such, we're going to be scaling energy shield, which obviously we are seeing. We need to scale energy shield. But we're also gaining a very, very healthy amount of armor in the tune of 49k, as you can see here. And if you wanted it to be a bit higher than that, you could technically by swapping out a warcry, but that's a damage versus defense type situation if you so choose to do that, of course. So the way this build ends up playing, effectively, is you're going to run around and you're going to cast your warcries. Now, because I hate warcries and I don't like buttons in my builds, I have automated my warcries, which is where the cannot block comes into play, because we are using the Eternal Apple, which is a shield that automatically procs our warcries when we get to max endurance charges, removes all our endurance charges, and then triggers one of our warcries. So we have 3 warcries in this shield because that is the max amount we can have in there. If we could, we would have more. And then we are using 2 rings with minimum endurance charges to pull our minimum endurance charges to 2, so that we can then, just by gaining 1 endurance charge, proc each warcry on the shield. And then we're gaining endurance charges when we get hit via this small cluster enduring composure. This effectively means whenever we get hits, we gain an endurance charge, the shield automatically rips it out and tries to trigger a warcry. If it's off cooldown, it triggers. And then because enduring composure gives us an endurance charge every second for 4 seconds, if we've been hit in the past 4 seconds, we can expect every single time that this procs and all our warcries are off CD, it just runs through all 3 of them, and it's very comfortable with the ring setup, of course. So this means effectively we're just running around, convocating our minions on us, killing and just vibing overall. Leap slamming. If you want, you can use dash. Basically, it's a 1-button build, and that 1 button is like a curse. You don't really need anything else, except you do use valve haste, so there is that. So let's say 2 buttons, 2 conditional buttons. You don't really need to press them anyways. So that is the core of the build. That is how it plays. Feels very comfortable, as you can probably see. Unlike typical warcry builds, you actually don't have to piano, which is the biggest selling point, I think, for me. Because warcries are so strong, it does open up the possibility of using a battle mage's cry, which is what we use, so that we can actually scale crit on this setup very efficiently. And the same goes for enduring cry. It gives us a lot of regen, and it gives our minions a lot of regen because they are also in the AoE, and it's another source of endurance charges that the shield can then rip off. But that doesn't work too well, I would say, for triggering Eternal Apple. But that's the conversation for another day. Anyways, one pain point, or one thing you might notice for the setup, and just to put it out there, is our minions have some regen by themselves, but not nearly as much as they would need to survive very juice content. So it is depending on how juicy content you're playing, you might actually want to keep your minions very close to you, so your enduring cry always hits them and they have that bit of AoE. Now, if you find that your minions end up dying more frequently because maybe you're running around way too much, you can always take 3 points from this area and put them into this area. This will give you warcry AoE and cooldown recovery rate. And why this is big is because AoE means it's going to hit a larger area, so it's more likely they'll be in the AoE. But then CDR means even if they're not in the AoE, there's a chance it procs again before it falls off on them, so they can then get the buff. That is something you can do. It just means you lose buff effect, and buff effect is very nice because with buff effects, you're going to be regenerating more enduring cry, you're going to have more damage with battle mage's cry, you're going to have even more damage with rallying cry. So it's you ideally don't want to drop this, but that's an option that's available to you. Now, for the weapon itself, we want a weapon that has good physical damage, so that we can actually give a good chunk of that physical damage to our minions, and then they can convert it with the new multiplier, the 4x multiplier on converting physical damage to elemental. So the plan is to have big physical, and how we do that is by getting a fractured gavel. It's a one-handed mace. I have it here, but I recommend having a reverse axe, which is slightly better than the gavel, but reverse axe is meta and it's going to be expensive to try to get any fractured base with reverse axe. I wouldn't really recommend you get this, but if you really had the currency to burn, then you could. I recommend Gavel because Gavel is a very close second, like very close. Like it could even be better than River Axe in some situations. And you can get a fractured increased physical damage for relatively cheap. I recommend fractured physical damage over fractured flat fizz because increased tends to have lower weighting, so it's harder to hit. I have a perfect roll fractured 179% increase damage, and then you're just going to spam Essence of Fear, which is minion damage, until you hit Flat Fizz, and that's basically it. You just want to free suffix past that, and you're going to just multi-mod it, put minion attack cast speed on it, and put trigger, and you're golden. So that is our weapon. We are then also going to be using a Dark Monarch. There are two helmets you could use. You could use a Dark Monarch or you could use a Wraith Lord. The Wraith Lord, I would say, is a cheaper alternative, and I do have a PoE that uses it. It's, as you can see, it's less DPS, which is why we eventually switched to a Dark Monarch. But the reason I say this is this is cheaper is because with the Wraith Lord, you can use the Ghastly Eye Jewels in the Wraith Lord to solve for many problems, including being stunned. We are going to be using the Wraith Lord in this cheaper version to become stun immune, whereas in the more expensive version, that stun immunity goes to our magic jewels, which considerably increases the cost of these magic jewels. So something to keep in mind. Twilight Regalia, wait for +1 max specters, and it needs to be fractured so you can get mana reservation efficiency. And past that, you just want Chaos Res, Fire Res, and ES. And you might be wondering, we are CI, why do we care about Chaos Res? And that is a very good question. The reason we go for Chaos Res, even though we are CI and immune to chaos damage, is because we are making use of Bone Meld. And what happens if you have -60 res and you give your minions half of that? They're going to get -30 res, chaos res rather. And that effectively means you're actively making your minions squishier and more prone to dying in chaos content. So you don't have to cap your chaos res by any means, but I at least recommend you get to net 0 chaos res, so you're at least not harming your minions. Now in my case, my in-game character has like 50 chaos res or something like that. Yeah, that's pretty healthy chaos res in game. I'll have a POB for my current in-game character snapshot in the description as well, in case you're curious. So that's why we go for chaos res on our items. Then we go for a 4-grain charge grip, so we can convert all our damage to cold. Cold allows us to freeze. Very comfy. I really like the freeze that my minions have. Like I've talked about it enough. It's really good. We're going for +2 level of Ray Spectre gems on our boots, alongside any res, and then movement speed, ES, and then dexterity. This is Essence crafted. I think my guide covers how you would get something like this, but you basically just Essence spam dexterity until you get your Ray Spectre, and you go from there. Again, I have a crafting guide you can follow that will go into way more detail, and so you shouldn't feel like you wouldn't know how to craft. It's very straightforward to actually craft if you have the currency to do it. Then Bone Meld, we are going for Bone Meld because of a few reasons. One, increased defense. We are using 10 minions, so 40% increased defense when we're scaling armor and ES is already very valuable. But then we're also able to give our Syndicate Operatives resistances, which is very big because thanks to our tree, we don't actually have the luxury of pathing to Brave Intentions, which means chaos res is very, very hard for them to get. So we do remedy this situation on the lower budget by also having maybe some Ghastly Eye Jewels with minion chaos res. It's not possible on this version, but by having positive res, we're able to give our minions some chaos res to, you know, help them mitigate damage with. And aside that, we also have, I believe, Dread March, which is a bit of minion chaos res as well. But that is a big part of why Bone Meld, and then we have +2 level of all minion skills because that is just extra damage. You want to get +2. +2 is non-negotiable. And then we go for Discipline as a implicit. You can leave the default implicit. Regen is very comfortable to have. I just went for the extra bit of max ES, but regen, we're using Zealot's Oath. So as you can see, we have 2600 ES, which is a big selling point of this build, by the way. Without any recharge, we're still fine. As you see, my ES is barely moving in the clips from earlier because we're just giga regen at all times. So like I said, you can leave the default regen here. You want to have a gloam ring. Now, whether your glow ring has minion damage and all of that is up to you on your budget, but you want to have a glow ring just to reduce the damage your minions take, which means you only want one, and that should be on your left ring slot, so you can take your minions are a bit tankier thanks to that. And you want the only mandatory mod here is minimum endurance charges, and parts that you just want to fill up your attributes and resistances. And the same thing goes for your bone ring. You want to minimum endurance mandatorily because it's very important for the generation of or for the use of your automatic warcries. Very important to have 2 minimum. Whether you can achieve this on 1 ring if you go mirrored, but I wouldn't recommend that. I would say this is I prefer this version because I get to craft it myself and not worry about the reflected outcome, if you will. And then we have a mage blood because this solves many holes in our defenses. What we get with our mage blood is we're getting movement speed, bleed and corruptible blood immunity, fire res, and max fire res, which affects all our resistances thanks to Chieftain. But then we also get additional early res, which helps us cap our resistances past just our suffixes. Then we have basalt and granite for a lot of armor, and then we have increased armor suffix as well as avoid shock when paired with storm shot for ailment immunity, which is how we get ailment immunity. Then for the grafts are very important. You want to have a summoning graft. This is going to be our source of brittle. Brittle is a debuff we apply to the enemies that makes them more likely to get crits. It increases your base crit against them, and it's very, very big if you want to skill crit on minions. And in this case, the stats we're actually prioritizing is CDR and either level of skills or damage done by minions summoned by this graft. Either or is fine. And then minion life is very nice to make your operatives even tankier. Attack speed implicit is the implicit of this base. If you can get more, get it. If you can't, it's fine. And then we're going for this replicating edgecraft. The reason we're going for this is, I mean, movement speed is nice, but that's not the reason. Minions deal increased damage. We want that increased damage. It feels really nice to have, as well as increase the effect of non-damaging ailments, because this graft applies some really, really big shocks, like really nice, and it leaves shock ground, so it's guaranteed to shock regardless of how tanky the enemy is. And with the increased effect of non-damaging ailments, we can actually get to like 20-21% shock with regardless of who the person you're fighting is. It's just guaranteed. So Uber or not, this is a steady like 20% shock, which is very, very nice. The lot of damage. I 100% recommend these two as your graft. You can choose to replace one of them with molten graft, which is a very, very good defensive option. It's really up to you which route you go. You can either go defensive or offensive. And then for the jewels, we're going for an adorned. Adorned increases the effect of corrupted magic jewels, which is why we have all these magic jewels. They're all just flat fizz and attack cast speed. And for the Dark Monarch version, you're going for a chance to avoid stun implicits, so you can actually be immune to stuns. And then past that, you want to have exactly one Cobalt Jewel, and the reason you want this is to actually get to 90% max fire res. Without this Cobalt Jewel, we would be at 89% max fire res. So you want to get something like this that has a bit of minion damage, max fire res, and if you can get the implicit, then you get the implicit as well. We're using an impossible escape here so we can pick up the warcry buff effect and make enemies taunted take even more damage, which is a very healthy damage boost. We're using our Watcher's Eye. The priority on the Watcher's Eye is you want to have phasing while you're affected by haste, so we can actually avoid running a quartz flask. The phasing is important. Past the phasing, the second most important mod is the energy shield recovery rate while affected by discipline. If you can get a 2 mod, good. If you can get a 3 mod, even perfect, because you can also go for physical damage reduction while affected by determination. This gives you a lot of PDR, gives you big phase mitigation, which is very nice to have, and we're getting determination from a Spectre. Now, I personally don't even have a 3 mod Watcher's Eye because I haven't found one that has a good determination mod, but it is an you can find if you can find a bite. If you can't, you can go for the 2 mod discipline and haste, and if you can't, there's 1 mod with phasing is still fine. Really, it's all just it's not mandatory by any means. And then we talked about Storm Shroud, but that about covers the gear section. Moving on to the skills, I have a few things to talk about when it comes to the links here. Now, you would see that we are trying to get 4 off colors, 3 greens and 1 blue. Minion damage is unticked because you can technically swap it with crit. It depends on the content you're doing and where you're at. Yeah, basically the same amount of DPS, 50.4 versus 50.0. But just keep in mind that crit requires you to have your offering up for it to have as much damage as awakened minion damage, whereas minion damage reduces your minions life, so it makes them even squishier, but it has good damage as well. So whichever way you go, up to you. Now, one thing to note, and I'll show you the config too, vicious projectiles has a less projectile attack speed modifier that's applied to Syndicate Operatives on PoE. That less projectile attack speed actually does not apply to the attacks because of the way Syndicate Operatives work. They are triggered. They use an attack that then triggers the projectiles, the different projectile attack. So they don't actually lose attack speed because the base attack that triggers their daggers is not a projectile attack. So we have a config here to compensate for the damage, but just by default, just know that the best support here over minion damage and over early damage attacks, vicious projectile is a very, very big damage multiplier for Syndicate Operatives, and I 100% recommend you get it. Now you notice that minion damage is better than early damage attacks, and it's more damage. However, this makes us reflect immune, which opens up an extra modifier on the map that we can run. We can run reflect maps on this build. So if you don't care about running reflect maps, then I would say feel free to switch to minion damage and get even more DPS. Or if you want to go bossing, that is an option to you if you go like whites, support gems and stuff like that. But I personally like having more mods available when I roll my maps, so I always opt for early damage attacks awakened. Then for our support Spectres, we are running a host chieftain for power charges. We are running a perfect guardian turtle for determination and PDR, physical damage reduction. And we are running a perfect Hydra, which gives us a hatred aura that is way better than any hatred aura that the player has, because it is the old hatred aura and it has more cold damage. I think it's like 20-something% more cold damage, 20%, 21%, something like that, which is very big. And by comparison, the one that players have does not have that. It's just physical damage as extra cold, and that is way worse of a modifier. So perfect Hydra is best in slot support for this build. But the Hydra is actually going to be in your main DPS setup because it can benefit from most of these modifiers here, most of these support gems, whereas the other two melees will be in here so they can proc Feeding Frenzy and Intimidate via Awaken melee phase. Then on our trigger weapon, we have Desecrate, Spirit Offering, and Forbidden Rite. The reason we have Forbidden Rite in here is because whenever Forbidden Rite gets cast, it applies a hit to us. This hit, it can be a trigger for our warcries to go off because it counts as a hit. Even though we're CI and immune to the damage, it still counts as a hit. So we get hit by this Forbidden Rite, we gain endurance charges via Enduring Composure, and then our warcries get triggered. So we don't actually need enemies to hit us. We can just trigger it with our Forbidden Rite, which is why we have Forbidden Rite in here. Then we have the Tree Cries, Enduring Cry for regen and endurance charges for ourselves, Rallying Cry for base damage, and Battle Mage's Cry. As a speed map alternative, if you have enough damage, you can also use Intimidating Cry in place of any one of these two. I wouldn't recommend dropping Enduring Cry. That you don't touch. But these two, you can drop any one of them for Intimidating Cry so you can move faster. It is way less damage, as you will see. Each of these war cries is a lot of damage, as you can very clearly see. So you only do this if the content you're running is way below your damage threshold and you don't feel like you need the damage for it. Like if you're running Egan maps and you just want to get to the boss and get your invitation, then slap it in. We're running Purity of Fire because Chieftain max fire res affects all res, so this is a big source of max fire res. Frostbite as our curse, Leap Slam, and Clarity. And for Leap Slam, we have Anointed Spiritual Command, so it feels very comfortable. We get all the attack speed from our minions. Feels very nice. That is why we don't need to link this to faster attacks or anything like that. And then for our 4 green triads, we have Val Haste, which is whenever it's up, it's more damage, but it's not going to always be up, so it's not currently ticked. And we also have Convocation because the white gem, And then dash second one because we don't have anything else that can go in there, so might as well have an extra mobility skill. No other reason. We don't really need this setup, but why not? You know, why not? And finally, in our shield, we go for an eternal apple that is corrupted with discipline skill. This way we can get a good level discipline skill without sparing a socket. Basically, this is a socket. The priority is discipline, and then as a second you can go for reduced crits. I have a double corrupt, but you can just get the one and you're still fine. The reduced crit just makes you more resilient to crit maps. And then last but not the least, going over the skill tree, the important things to note are your cluster jewels. We're just going for a typical energy shield attack speed cluster. If you can get effect big, but those are more expensive. You don't have to get effects. If you just get ES and attack speed, it's way cheaper. That is what I currently have in game. Effect is obviously more damage and more ES. Well, you know, if you can't afford it to, you can't afford to. Your priority for the medium cluster is going to be a minion medium cluster that has Dread March for physical damage reduction for your minions and chaos res, as well as hulking corpses because we want to give them as much life as we can to make them tanky. And then we also have enduring composure as a small cluster. And then for this one, you're going to have one of these, which is an exerted attack cluster. It is going to have lead by example, which is a free source of onslaught for you and your nearby allies whenever you warcry. And warning call gives you 100% increased armor is basically how you read it. It's very, very good for armor scaling. Without warning call, we basically go from 41k to 49k with it. So very, very nice to have. Aside that, you're just going to be, those are the only mediums you have. It's going to be the same large, but the only thing that changes is the actual jewels you go in here, because you're just trying to stack magic jewels for your adorned. And that's pretty much it. Oh wait, and then there's our rune grafts. We opt for the rune grafts for gemcraft, which is +1 level of all non-exceptional support gem. This is a bit more damage. We also opt for rune graft to the fortress. However, I do recommend, and this is going to be completely your call when it comes to the decision, you can opt for rune graft of the runecraft, or you can go for rune graft of the warp. Now, I recommend rune graft of the warp because warp is very, very comfortable defensively. Having your buffs last 30% longer with rune graft of the warp effectively means that your warcries, your enduring cry lasts longer on you, your intimidating cry, if you decide to use it for movement speed, all those will last longer. If you're going shrines, they last longer. And the reason that feels very comfortable is with enduring cry without this, sometimes it can feel a bit tight on when the warcry procs and when it drops off, to the point where when you enter combat again, you might not actually have the regen. So when they start damaging you, you don't have the giga regen for a few seconds before it actually triggers. So with rune graft of the warp, basically as you're going pack to pack to pack to pack, you have 0 worries for your enduring cry falling, and it just feels very comfy defensively. So I would recommend this. Do note, if you go for a warp over gemcraft, it is slightly less damage. It's not enough that you should notice, but it is less damage. So I felt the need to just put it in here and let you guys decide which you prefer. I personally recommend the warp. Anyways, that is for the most part it. Divine shield here gives us extra regen, which is very nice. We get 50% reduced crits here. Everything else is very straightforward. Anyways, I think it's about time to stop yapping. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. I will answer any and every comment that's there. If you haven't already, do consider liking and subscribing, as it helps the channel out a lot. And with all that said, thank you for watching.